Hi, this is Lex, and welcome to the Fintech Blueprint. It's your podcast about fintech, decentralized finance, digital banking, investing, robo-advice, artificial intelligence, and all the other frontier technology that is transforming financial services. To get more content, like an illustrated transcript of this conversation in your inbox, subscribe at fintechblueprint.com. So without further delay, let's jump into today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast conversation. We have a really interesting topic and company to talk about today. I want to welcome Dave Hoare, who is the CTO and co-founder of a really cool company called Codat. And we're going to learn about small businesses, their financial data, aggregation, and then the types of embedded finance companies that can be built around it. With that, Dave, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Great to be here.
My pleasure. I'm really interested in jumping in directly to talk about Codat and the industry that it serves. Can you help us by setting just the foundation of what the company is, how long it's been around, and maybe some of the things that it does?
Of course. Yeah. So Codat has been around just over 6 years now. It's founded by myself and my two co-founders, Peter and Alex, back in 2017. We're based in London in the UK and also in New York and Sydney, Australia. And we provide a developer tool. We sell to developers and primarily fintechs and financial institutions. What we're here to do is provide infrastructure and data products to allow all of these different systems that small businesses use to run their business to connect together really seamlessly. So the background here is that today's businesses, particularly smaller businesses, are using a very, very large number of tools to perform specialist tasks, right? So we're moving away from this world in which a business owner or an accountant or someone in an operations team is only using one or two large platforms to do all of their work. Actually, this boom in fintech has meant that there's now all sorts of different amazing products that we can use as a small business to run different areas and to perform different tasks, which is great. It means that we now have this luxury of having these really specialized tools and lots of choice in terms of products. It poses a challenge to the user in that if those systems and those products don't play nicely together, we can end up spending a huge amount of our time moving data from one place to the other, typically through some manual process. So I'm talking about manually reconciling payments, manually inputting receipts and things like that. If we are perhaps wanting to apply for some lending, actually gathering that data together can be a bit of a challenge. And so the solution here, of course, is to connect all of those systems together through automation and through APIs. That connectivity layer, that's what Codat is here to provide. That's our area of focus.
There's a couple of trends going on. One of the trends has been the rise of embedded finance and API-first fintechs, which are there as platforms for other companies. And this is one of the pillars that we're talking about. Another thing to think about is also that the market has changed quite a bit over the last year, 2 years, as the macro environment shifted, the valuations of companies have adjusted, and there's been a retrenchment into B2B business models, payments business models in fintech, which have higher quality earnings and are generally more recurring, higher quality businesses. And so in this context, Codat, I think what I've seen is you've raised a $40 million check in 21, you've raised a $100 million check in 22 to expand this layer. I mean, I'm going to say it. I know it's wrong. I'm going to say plaid for small business. I know it's not quite right. And so I think it's really interesting because in the current environment, between the importance of embedded finance and the focus on payments and B2B, I think a lot of what you're doing is really topical. So with that sort of biased context of my interest aside, I wanted to ask you to open up a little bit more, kind of like what are exactly the small businesses that, the fintechs that you work with serve? Like what are the types of things, if you could just paint a picture of who they are, and then paint a picture of the types of fintechs that are using you to intermediate these various relationships?
For sure. So when I'm talking about small businesses, I guess there's a variety of different definitions. I sort of think about it in terms of fewer than, say, 250 employees is what we would define as that small to medium business segment that we focus on at Codat. Obviously, that's a very, very broad definition, and we have small businesses collected to our platform who are close to like a sole trader type of business, whether it's maybe one person, two people, three people, all the way up to that sort of mid-market size. So when talking about our clients, the fintechs who we help, a great example here is basically clients who need or want to do some form of automated reconciliation. So one, I guess, segment that Codat works with is point of sale. So this has been a really, really exciting part of the market over the past few years. We now have lots and lots of people offering point of sale products to small businesses, allowing them to collect card payments. Obviously, off the back of the events of 2020, card payments are more important than ever, right? The use of cash is decreasing, almost to vanishing point, and certainly here in London. And so these card providers are facilitating that. The card terminal providers are facilitating those card payments. That's great for the small business, but they need to get the data on those payments that they've taken and those products that they've sold into their accounting system. So they need to do tax returns, say, they need to do reporting. In order to do that accurately, they really, really need the information on their sales to be making its way into the accounting platform. Traditionally, that would involve some manual input. That requires somebody at the end of a hard day's work in a coffee shop or similar to be consolidating all of their receipts and to be inputting that into some system manually. That's a really, really bad way of working. That's something that we're trying to solve.
Is the point of sale device itself not equipped to connect the receipt data to the card network data?
It is, but that's typically not enough for the business to do all of their reporting. They want to be able to, say, compare that with their expense data and have this like single unified view of their finances. And the place to do that, certainly for a lot of businesses, is in these accounting packages. And so it's really crucial that the card terminal is able to connect into the accounting package and be pushing a view of those transactions in to allow the accountant to go in and have that view. That is the piece of the puzzle that Codat is here to solve. So we provide that connectivity technology to card terminal providers such that rather than having to end the day manually inputting this data, actually the accountant can wake up in the morning and all of the previous day's transactions have automatically been pushed in some standard way and they can do their reporting straight off the bat. That's a great example because it, I think, illustrates where Codat is solving a very real problem, but we're kind of hidden from small businesses, right? The business in that case, the coffee shop has no idea that Codat exists. We're really, really solving the problem at the back end. We don't sell to small businesses. We don't market to small businesses. I would expect that the majority of the market has no idea we exist. We're that infrastructure layer, and so we are there to help fintechs to build these products that provide that great interconnected experience.
Another thing I wanted to know in terms of the experience of the small business, I guess two things. One is you've mentioned kind of like the accounting software. And I've seen in other places on your site, for example, like ERP software and other large packages you mentioned before, like a platform that these companies would use. Can you talk about what are the different types of softwares in which the data aggregation adds value? Like, is it 40 different types of things? Is it 2 different types of things? Is it that we're taking ERP and melting it down into APIs and rebuilding it from scratch? Or is it just really like they're all these different things that customers need? And so it's really important to make data portable. Can you just flesh it out in terms of those packages?
Of course, yeah. So we see the accounting package or the ERP as being at the heart of the small business reporting function. And that's also a bit of a sink, if you like. That's where a lot of data eventually ends up. And so a lot of the connectivity piece flows in that direction. But I think you can also see value, I guess, not just moving data from one place to another, but ingesting data from multiple sources and seeing how it stacks up all together. So Codat helps lenders. Our background is in lending. I started my career working at a fintech lending company. And so we can use the technology that we have in terms of these connections to not just accounting data, but point of sale data, say e-commerce data as well, platforms like Shopify, banking data via partners like Plaid and TrueLayer. We can use all of those different sources of data together to help lenders. So what lenders want to achieve is making really, really sound underwriting decisions and making them quickly. And we can do those things with data, right? That's nothing new. We've relied on data from bureaus, from credit rating agencies for a very, very long time now to help make those better decisions. But if we want to make those decisions really quickly, and we also want to make sure we're serving businesses where perhaps there isn't quite so detailed a credit file available, you can achieve that by ingesting data from a whole bunch of different sources and then mixing it together. So if we go back to that coffee shop example, say, if that business is looking for some finance, if they're looking for a line of credit, even if there isn't necessarily a huge amount of data available on them out there, maybe they haven't been registered at Companies House in the UK for very long, or they don't have a detailed credit record at Experian, a modern lender can allow that business to share their point of sale data directly. So the lender can review, hey, here's how many coffees I sold yesterday. Here's how many I sold last month. And they can have a really, really good view of the day-to-day workings of the business. They can pull the accounting data to look at what our expense profile looks like, what our profit margins might look like, perhaps what our payroll liability is. And then for good measure, you could also pull in the banking data via Plaid and have a view of the cash position and things like that. Actually, if you join all of those data sets together, perhaps even cross-referencing them against each other, suddenly you have this very, very fully fledged, very well-rounded view of the financial health of a business. And so that's an example of where we can, I guess, not just be moving data from A to B, but taking data from multiple sources to produce something greater than the sum of its parts.
Super interesting. And I want to ask you about that aggregation function, because I think it's, in the case of a retail data aggregator, as an individual, it's pretty straightforward. I just want my brokerages and my bank accounts to come into the same place and display there. And I do that by APIs or jailbreaking through screen scraping or some other method. For your service, on the connector side, you said you can connect into Plaid and get bank account information. What are all the different sources that you connect to, and what is the technical architecture required to pull that in and normalize it? And that's in the context of knowing that if you need to plug into 10,000 bank accounts, you might need a giant team to kind of monitor what the connectors look like and rebuild them every time the website changes. So I guess, can you talk about what are the types of integrations you have when you pull data, and then what's required in order to maintain that infrastructure to be live and useful?
Our connectors work purely via API. We don't have to contend with any of the challenges of screen scraping and similar. That doesn't mean it's a straightforward problem to solve, though. I think while it's great that so many of the products that we connect into have an API, and fintechs and people who are building these products increasingly see the value of offering an API, even if we are using words like API first, 9 times out of 10, that naturally has to be less of a core part of their proposition than their main product. And so even with the best intentions, that API sometimes goes down. Sometimes it's not very well documented. Sometimes it is well documented, but behaves in strange ways in certain circumstances. This is, in software engineering, we love to find ways to prove the correctness of the work that we do through things like automated proofs or unit tests, things like that. This is an area where that sort of guaranteed correctness is really, really hard because we are dealing with what could be seen as an unreliable third party. And so our team, who have now been doing this for quite a few years, have built all of these API connections on top of a really, really robust integrations platform that we have built to support that connectivity. And then it is just a case of constantly monitoring the data that comes through. We talk about ourselves as the pipes, right? It's not our data. We are using that data to support our clients. We can monitor the data that's flowing through those pipes in an automated way to constantly be looking for anomalies, constantly be looking for cases where the data is not behaving as we are expecting it to behave. And that's a big task. That is a challenge. And that's something that I think a lot of people who build API integrations realize quite quickly, is that building the first one is easy. building an integration to a modern API is not a hard task for a software engineer. For a lot of people, it's their bread and butter. The problems come when you are building multiple integrations and pulling multiple sets of data from each integration, is that actually you are going to need to have a need for those to behave in some self-similar way. And so standardizing the way all of those integrations behave, both in normal circumstances and in abnormal circumstances, that's where the real challenge lies. And so we've got a big team of engineers focused on these integrations, focused on making sure that they are delivering a consistent experience and that we are, I guess, smoothing the edges of these upstream APIs as best we can so that our clients can use them in some self-similar way, even if on the other side they actually behave in quite different ways. Some of these financial concepts are quite complex. They're representing very complex things, often in quite different ways, and finding ways to standardize that is hard. We actually have one or two connections to desktop software, so accounting packages that users are running on their machine. They're running Windows. It's a desktop app, and so there we have the challenge that, well, what happens if the computer's switched off? What happens if the computer's disconnected from the internet? What if there is some library file that is missing from that machine, or the connection is unreliable? That just adds another layer of the challenge of how can we present that desktop experience as if it is a modern REST API. That's why we've invested so much in this infrastructure. It's why we have a large team of people working on this, because that's the heart of the value that we provide, is, I guess, solving those really hairy integration problems.
What does the experience look like from the customer's perspective? You said you're the infrastructure, it's API integrated. Does a screen or some embedded version of the flow or anything bearing the Codat brand ever come up to the end customer, or is it really, have you tried to make it completely integrated?
Typically it is completely integrated. So like I say, we have no interest, I guess, in capturing the eyeballs of small businesses. That's not the market that we sell into. We provide products that make it easier for our clients to get our technology working in their stack. So this is like out-of-the-box embedded link journeys, out-of-the-box embedded dashboards, things like that. Basically, we want to make it as easy as possible for our customers to get this tech in the hands of their customers. But again, we white label that as much as we can. It's really important to us that we are removing as much friction as possible from this journey, and a user suddenly having to interact with an entity that they perhaps are not familiar with or haven't interacted with in the past, that could be an additional source of friction. A big part of our goals is to make it as easy as possible for these businesses to share data. And so we want to be providing that infrastructure layer that actually allows the businesses that those customers already have relationships with and already trust to provide those connected experiences.
I want to shift to the economics of the business and how you think about the value that you're generating for customers. I'm not sure what you can share, but whatever it is that you can is interesting. Like, is it based on volumes? Is it based on API calls? Is it different depending on what kind of data gets pulled through? How do you think about the economics of this offering?
So we've got something like 300, 400 clients around the world at the moment. They are very different. We've deliberately made our product as general as possible such that it can serve lots of different use cases. And so we've got clients who are the very largest financial institutions in the world, and we've got clients who are just a startup who are just coming out of stealth mode, right? So the way in which we price varies between those different use cases. Those sorts of businesses have very, very differing expectations from us in terms of what they need. Enterprise requirements are very different to the requirements of someone at that startup phase. We do offer a self-serve plan. Lots of businesses, particularly when they're just starting out. I remember when Codat first started, actually getting involved in a sales process was not what we wanted. When we just, we needed a piece of tech. We wanted to go to a website, plug in a credit card, get an API key, start building. And that's something that we want to facilitate as well. So people who want to just have a go can just go to our website. They can grab an API key and they can have a play with that technology immediately. And then obviously we provide plans on top of that for people who want more from us in terms of support, implementations, assistance, enterprise requirements, things like that.
Can you give an example of a large customer, whether it's, a bank or a fintech, and the types of requirements they have to integrate such an important piece of technology into their stack and into their value chain? What is it that you have to do for somebody who's got scale and considering, using you as one of the core offerings for whether it's underwriting or payments or commerce?
Yeah, so we've got lots of clients at that sort of enterprise level. We sell to people like PayPal, people like Experian, and there it's really about, I guess, making sure that we can plug into their way of working as best we can. So these are things like enterprise security requirements, things like single sign-on through third-party single sign-on providers. That's something that we typically have to offer for these large enterprises, and yeah, likewise making sure that we are complying with their data policies. And so this is why we have a compliance team and a legal team who are very, very well versed on this stuff to make sure that we are complying with those enterprises' policies. Data privacy and data consent it's a hot topic at the moment. Off the back of things like GDPR, this is something that actually businesses are taking a very, very close look at. Actually, this is something that Codat can kind of help with a bit, in that we can provide that layer in between the enterprise and their customer, and maintain that record that the business is consenting to share their data, and they turned up that connection at this point and then they terminated the connection later on. Actually having that audit log is really important to some of these big enterprises.
I think one of the issues I want to pull out and kind of share with the audience is the difference between the self-serve model that you described, which is, I have a company that wants to underwrite some particular small business credit. I'm a big fan of restaurants, and so I want to target Italian restaurants in New York. I want to target all the pizza shops with my very best pizza shop underwriting software. And so I just need the API and get to it quick. Versus I'm PayPal and I need an 18-month sales process and a 20-person team to integrate into your software, and I'll pay for that upfront professional services work. And so I understand that Codat has like a partnership program with technology partners and services partners. And, the example would be a PwC or Deloitte that would take the large organization on that journey and then implement stuff. Can you talk about what that looks like? Like, what are the requirements to successfully sell a key part of the technology stack to a large enterprise? And then what role do integrators and, other consultants and professional services firms play in making that actually like digestible to those types of companies?
I think sometimes the challenge with these large enterprise prospects is that there are lots and lots of directions in which we could go. The very biggest banks in the world, there are tons of different use cases in which they could be using this sort of technology. And so we have to be quite disciplined with them in terms of finding the most valuable use case to start with and then expanding from there. I think we can all be guilty of getting overexcited with the possibilities of this stuff. And so it's really important to pick our battles and start with something that delivers value as quickly as possible. Because the other thing is it's not just a case of selling software into a big bank, say. It's crucially important for us that we see traction and that we see usage. So the worst possible scenario is that we sign a contract with an organization. They then aren't able to get any of their business customers to engage with that feature. And then we have to terminate that contract at some point because it's not getting traction. And so this is why we have a big team in our solutions engineering and our implementations teams who are there to provide expertise to people who are implementing our API. We have this off-the-shelf product. We have this self-serve motion. It's very easy to get up and running with the API, but this is complex stuff. And there are all sorts of nuances to how the data can be used, how best to position the link flow such that the user engages with it, all sorts of areas in which we have built up a large amount of expertise. And so this is why our solutions engineering and our implementations teams can go on that journey with these large enterprises and help them shape an approach that makes sense for their customers. As you say, this is also something where partnerships has a big part to play. we've talked a lot about how Codat is very, very back end, and we're interested in providing that infrastructure layer. Through that same logic, we're not afraid to be engaging with partners who are going to sort of add another layer to that stack. Actually, that works really well for us. It means that we can focus on the infrastructure, and those partners, often we work with partners who have specialisms in certain ways of using our product. So they specialize in perhaps underwriting to a specific segment or in a specific geography, or they provide, automation layers, or indeed they are just services partners who are just really, really experienced at building new things in a certain segment, so in a lending environment. And so these are the people who our partnerships team are constantly engaging with to try and find ways in which they can help us expedite that route into these big enterprises and expedite those enterprises seeing some success and seeing some value from this tech.
This is a really interesting area for me because it's the place where the startup scar tissue is formed, and the company's been on the journey for over 6 years, raised a meaningful amount of money, and has a lot of traction. So I want to dig around here a little bit more, if you'll allow me. And that is, it sounds like maybe you've had some customers you've had to fire. You've had some folks who said they were going to do things, but then didn't prioritize it, didn't have the right staffing against it, and weren't able to get sufficient benefit. Can you talk about either an example or a type of customer that you were excited about, but then ended up failing out, and for what reason that happened? Or if not, then more generally, what kinds of hypotheses in these 6 years of operating have you had that ended up being false, that you ended up pivoting out of?
I think from that background in lending, certainly early on, a lot of the conversations we were having with lenders was around ways in which they can make use of this sort of data, and that's something that they get very excited about. We saw customers very early on in those sorts of areas who were using that. They did invest in building a product that used this data, but the value that the small business got out of that was never made very clear. It's like, hey, link your accounts, which to most businesses, they will look at that and they will think, why? What's the call to action here? What am I achieving? And so those were cases typically where we didn't get traction, where actually, unless the user has a clear reason to be enabling this sort of stuff, they just aren't going to do it. And so those are typically the cases where we had, we would sign a deal, they would not manage to get very much volume through the platform. And then at the time of renewal, actually, it's not something that makes sense for any party to be continuing. And so a lot of the work that we have done is around educating, I guess, refining our product, but also educating our clients and our prospects and the market at large about how we need to be positioning this stuff. We talked about the point of sale example, where actually it's very, very clear to the business what the benefit is. I'm spending hours every week manually reconciling this stuff. If I just turn this on, then I don't need to do that anymore, and everything will automatically flow. Those are the sorts of cases where we get great traction and we get great user engagement because it is saving them time. Likewise, if we talk about the lending case, it is, hey, rather than having to fill out all of this form and have to scan in some documents to send to us now, and by the way, you're going to have to scan and send it every month so that we can check that your business is continuing to perform, just click this button, set this up, and just forget about it. Like we get those reports in an automated way. We don't need to be wasting your time asking you to be resubmitting data all the time. And that has been the most powerful way of getting traction that we've seen, is making it really, really clear to the business owner, hey, this is going to save you time. This is going to save you money. This is going to make your life easier in some way. And so that's nowadays how we're having those conversations with our customers, getting them thinking in that way.
Fascinating stuff. And then the opposite question, is there been a time when you were surprised by a use case? You didn't expect traction in some way, and then boom, all of a sudden, you have a bunch of customers at the door asking you for New York City pizza underwriting software. Like, is there an example of something strange that was interesting to you?
Talking about the COVID pandemic, right, which is that looms large over Codat. We've been around since 2017, so 3 of those years have been post pandemic or during the pandemic. And actually, 2020 was a huge year for us. That was the year that we raised our first institutional investment. We raised our Series A in May of 2020, and the catalyst for that was at the start of the pandemic, which obviously, hugely unexpected turn of events. Actually, we got to a place where there were millions of businesses in the UK and around the world who were in desperate need of funding. And so there were government-backed schemes to assist them. Talking about here in the UK, we had the CBILS scheme, we had the bounce-back schemes. These are underwritten by the government, but crucially, they were delivered by the banks. They were delivered by lenders, and the government in the background was underwriting those and was, backing those. And so then we suddenly had this case where these enterprises, and we talked about how these can be very, very long sales processes. We're talking months, potentially years, to be getting some of this tech into those banks. Actually, suddenly the banks had been told by the government, hey, you need to be in a position where you can lend billions out to small businesses, and you need to be in that position in a week from now, 2 weeks from now. And so that proposition to a bank, certainly thinking about traditional ways in which they work, sort of unthinkable, right? It's, if you think about the manual data collection and manual processing that is needed in order to do that, it wasn't going to happen. And so that was a great opportunity for us to unexpectedly play a part in that emergency response. So we worked with some of the very, very largest banks here in the UK to help them stand up lightweight application journeys that, rather than depending on the manual data collection and depending on those traditional ways of working, actually had automated data collection front and center. So actually it's a much quicker experience for the business who is in this dire financial situation and is in desperate need of funding. And then that automation allowed the bank to turn around these loans in a matter of days. And ultimately it was billions and billions that were lent out to businesses. And so that was a great opportunity for us to, looking back, there will be businesses that are around today that perhaps wouldn't have been if the government and the banks weren't able to lend that money at that time. So that was a nice opportunity for us to help out in that situation.
You never know which way the wind will blow. And I think all the arguments that finance has about the importance of T+1 or T+3 settlement and manual process are just trying to defend a fragile infrastructure stack. And when we do have the option for real-time stuff, for actual modern technology, then it becomes a complete game changer. One last question I wanted to ask you, again, kind of just to contextualize the market dynamics, is are there folks that you're bumping into with your product? Like, what is the value chain between partnerships and competitors and so on? Because I understand the role of professional services in helping integrate into the larger providers. I understand that there's going to be a lot of fintechs that just go straight into the technology and plug it in to test their market, and that some data aggregators are providers for you because that only broadens the scope of what you can do. But end of the day, there's only a limited set of economics, and that set of economics will be only borne by the end customer and then kind of split up across the value chain. The question is, what's the competitive landscape like? Is there anyone that you're bumping into? And then, how do you see the dynamics of this clearing out? Like, is this a winner take all type of industry, or, there's lots of providers? Like, what's the meat part here?
This is still very much an emerging industry, and so we don't really have all of the answers. We see this as an inevitability, right? This is something that business owners expect, and so I'm sure there will be more and more activity in this space. The major competitor that we come up against is actually our customers wanting to build this stuff themselves, and this goes back to that idea of, hey, building one API integration is easy. And so actually, and certainly this was the case in the early days, if we lost a deal, typically it wouldn't be to a competitor, it will be to the customer saying, hey, our engineering team can build this stuff themselves. I guess the positive flip side of that is that a lot of those customers came back. A lot of those customers are customers today, because it's that realization that your engineering resource is one of your most precious commodities. It is expensive, and the opportunity cost is enormous. And so really the message here is buy it, don't build it. That's a philosophy that we try to follow internally. And I think that has been that has been the realization for these businesses who go away and try and build it themselves, is actually they get themselves into the same position that we got into at the finance company we worked at before, that actually, if you're spending all of your time building these integrations, is that really the best use of your engineering resource when it's not core to your business?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the biggest competitor for all financial software is Excel. Prying Excel out of the cold hands of the population in exchange for actually functional software is the first thing to overcome.
Yeah, hey, Excel's pretty cool too.
Yeah, it works. You can put things in it. This is fascinating stuff. And I think one of the takeaways for me is actually that when you are sitting in the seat of a company, whether it's a fintech or a bank or an enterprise or a commerce platform, and you are making these build or buy decisions, it's fair to assume that the people who are selling you the software have really tried to do the best under the circumstance, and often are shaped by the pressures of capitalism in a way that's much, much more efficient than trying to do something internal, right? So if you have a company where you have well-incentivized founders that are trying to build something that works really well, then I think you learn a lot from that product. You learn a lot from the signal of what that product can do, and you can learn to figure out, the market price for it is very often fair, especially from fintech companies that have had to compete for that market share. And I think what a lot of folks that are evaluating that build or buy decision, if the buy decision doesn't make sense, often they just have an incorrect starting point. Like their build starting point is underpricing the complexity and the difficulty and cost of trying to make something themselves. So I think when I look out on the market and try to make these decisions, taking the pricing and the economics of third-party providers at face value of that's actually the economic value that's provided and how much it costs to build, I think is a pretty reasonable starting point. So with that, I wanted to thank you for joining us today in the conversation and ask you if our audience wanted to learn more about you or about Codat, where should they go?
Absolutely. So you can find Codat online. Codat.io is our website. You can sign up for an API key there and have a play with our API and get in touch with our team if you'd like to hear more.
Fantastic. Dave, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Hi, everyone. That's it for this week's episode of the FinTech Blueprint. For more technical deep dives into all things FinTech and decentralized finance, check out fintechblueprint.com and grab a free subscription to the newsletter. This is Lex, and I'll see you next time.